Hello there, Year 7. Welcome to Lesson 5 of your Heritage Scheme of Work this half term. Some of you will recognise me as one of your English teachers. My name is Miss Divers. I'm also a cover teacher at school as well, so I cover all sorts of lessons across the college. Now, what I'd like you to do is grab yourself a piece of paper and a pen, ready to write down your date and title. As my class know, the expectation is to have your paper and pen ready to do your title and date before we start the lesson. Okay, so here is your title, Aegeus's Complaint Part 1. Alright, make sure you have the title and date written down before you make a start on our starter exercise. So last lesson you looked at the plot of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that was with Miss Welton. So what I'd like you to do is look at those two characters on your screen. You should see Theseus on the left and Hippolyta on the right. And what I'd like you to do is write down everything you know about those two characters. As an extension, what I'd like you to do is write down how is a play different from a novel, and answer that question for me, please. So, how do you think a play differs from a novel? I'm going to give you 5 minutes to work on that task, and then what I'd like you to do is just move on to the next slide when you're done. So let's take a look then at the brief descriptions here of Theseus and Hippolyta. Theseus is a ferocious and much loved king of Athens. He's fierce in battle and wise in his judgments. Hippolyta is going to marry Theseus. She is the proud queen of the Amazons, a nation of female warriors. Their marriage will unite the warring Athenians and the Amazonians. Let's move on. So you've already looked at some information about William Shakespeare in your previous lessons, but let's just have a quick recap so everyone's on the same page. So Shakespeare was a famous writer who lived during the Elizabethan era. His school taught him a lot about ancient Rome and Greece, so he often sets his plays 2,000 years before his lifetime. So, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to begin reading one of his plays. So let's take a look at the character of Aegeus then. So, Aegeus is a nobleman. He is friends with Theseus and Hippolyta. He's a strict father. Can you think of any times when your parent or carer has made you do something or stopped you from doing something? Take a moment to think about that and think about how it feels to be told what to do, or how it feels to be told not to do something as well. And that will come in really important to keep in mind throughout this lesson when we're talking about Aegeus and his relationships to other characters. So, we're going to start reading one of the greatest plays in the English language. This scene takes place in ancient Athens. Aegeus is a rich man. He knows Theseus and Hippolyta. He wants to complain about his daughter Hermia, and he wants her to marry a man called Demetrius. But she wants to marry the man she loves, Lysander. Okay, so look at this little triangle we've got going on here, yeah? So, he wants Hermia to marry Demetrius, but she doesn't want to marry Demetrius because she wants to marry the man that she loves, Lysander. So, what we're going to do is we're going to quickly read through Aegeus's complaint in Act 1, Scene 1. Okay? So, what I'd like you to do is listen carefully while we read through this together. I'm going to read for you Aegeus's complaint from Act 1, Scene 1, lines 22 to 45. Feel free to read along with me by looking at the slide in front of you, and if you feel stuck on any of the words, then take a look at the glossary on the right-hand side. Full of vexation come I with complaint against my child, my daughter Hermia. Stand forth, Demetrius, my noble lord, this man hath my consent to marry her. Stand forth, Lysander, and my gracious duke, this man hath bewitched the bosom of my child. Thou, Lysander, thou hast given her rhymes, and interchanged love tokens with my child. Thou hast by moonlight at her window sung with feigning voice verses of feigning love, and stolen the impression of her fantasy. With bracelets of thy hair, rings, gauds, conceits, knacks, trifles, nosegays, sweetmeats, messengers of strong prevailment in unhardened youth, with cunning hast thou filched my daughter's heart, turned her obedience, which is due to me, to stubborn harshness. And my gracious duke, be it so she will not hear before your grace consent to marry with Demetrius, I beg the ancient privilege of Athens, as she is mine, I may dispose of her, which shall either be to this gentleman or to her death, according to our law immediately provided in that case. So considering what we've just read, how do we think Aegeus might be feeling? Who is he complaining about? Which man does he like? Which man does he not like? What I'd like you to do is pause the video or the slideshow right here and just take a few minutes to write your responses to those questions before moving on. So you should have some similar responses to the sorts of things I have here. Aegeus is full of vexation. He is very angry. He's really angry about the situation that's going on. Who's he complaining about? Well, of course, he's complaining about his daughter, Hermia. And which man does he like? Well, he likes Demetrius. He wants Hermia to marry him. But he doesn't like Lysander, who is the man that Hermia wants to marry. So what has Lysander done? What should his daughter do? And what does he want to happen to her if she doesn't do what he wants? Take a few minutes to answer those questions as well, and then we'll discuss your responses. So, Aegeus thinks that Lysander has bewitched Hermia and used cunning to make her fall in love with him. This is why he's so angry about the situation. What does he think his daughter should do? He wants his daughter to consent to marry with Demetrius. And what does he want to happen to her if she doesn't do what he wants? Well, if she doesn't marry Demetrius, Aegeus thinks she should be sent to her death. Proper harsh, right? Moving on, let's take a look at the three characters in front of us and recap. So, Demetrius thinks he should marry Hermia. But Lysander and Hermia, they love each other. So that's where the awkward love triangle comes into play here. So a word we can use to describe ancient Athens is severe. If something's severe, it means it's very strict or harsh. We could have said that Aegeus is a strict father. Could we also call him a severe father? Why or why not, do you think? So Aegeus is more than just a strict father. He's a severe father because he demands that Theseus kill his daughter if she disobeys him. He insists that she has to marry Demetrius, even though Lysander is very similar and is the man she loves. So this is a very difficult situation here, guys. Aegeus really wants her to marry Demetrius. However, she really loves Lysander. So it's a bit of a sticky situation for Hermia right here. So your main task for today, Year 7, what I'd like you to do is write one paragraph to answer this question. Why do we feel sorry for Hermia at this point of the play? I'd like you to explain your ideas using as many words from below as you can see in that grey box in the middle there. And as an extension, I want you to try and use some supporting quotations from your script. That would be really important and really great for you to do. It will really boost your marks for you to be able to include quotations, and it's a really great experience to use in the future. As you can see at the bottom of the slide, we've got mastery checks as we usually have in our lessons. So we have check 1, check 2, check 3 and check 4. You'll recognise these probably from your grammar booklets as well. So check 1, does every sentence start with a capital letter and then with a full stop? Check 2, are all the names spelled correctly and do they start with a capital letter? Check 3, have you managed to use at least 3 of the suggested words? And check 4, have you supported your opinion with what you've learnt about life in ancient Athens? I would like you to pause the video or the PowerPoint presentation right here and crack on with that task for me. Make sure that you write up your responses either on paper or on a Word document or on Show My Homework. To sum up what we've done today then, which of the following opening statements are true? Hermia is in love with Lysander. Aegeus forbids his daughter to marry Lysander. Aegeus is the king of Athens. Aegeus wants his daughter to marry Demetrius. And Aegeus is going to marry Hippolyta. Which ones are true? Pause the video, have a quick think, and then move on to the responses. So you should have these as your correct answers, guys. So A is correct, Hermia is in love with Lysander. B is also correct, Aegeus forbids his daughter to marry Lysander. And D is also correct, Aegeus wants his daughter to marry Demetrius. So that's a very quick summary so far of Aegeus's complaint. In the next lesson, we will be exploring it a little bit further. You can move on to the next lesson right now if you'd like to, if you have the time. If not, you can save it for the next time you have a timetabled English lesson and you can come to it then. Hi Year 7, welcome to Lesson 6 of your Heritage scheme of work this half term so far.
Make sure that if you're rejoining this lesson at a different time to lesson 5, you make sure you get yourself a fresh piece of paper and a pen to write yourselves down the title and date for the lesson. So today's lesson we are going to be looking at Aegeus's complaint part 2. So if you could write that down as your title then, and make sure you've got the date written down as well. And as your starter activity, what I would like you to do is take a look at these statements and answer for me which of the following opening statements are true. Okay, so Hermia loves Lysander, Hermia loves Demetrius, or Aegeus forbids Hermia to marry Lysander. What I'd like you to do is just identify which one of those is true, and as an extension I would like you to have a look at the questions at the bottom of the slide. What kind of a father is Aegeus, and what words might you use to describe him? We did quite a lot of work on that in lesson 5, so you should have a good knowledge to answer those questions. So I'd like you to pause here and just write your responses there. So here are the answers. The following opening statements here are true. Hermia loves Lysander, but Aegeus forbids Hermia to marry Lysander. Remember, we've got that love triangle going on there, haven't we? We've got Lysander, Demetrius and Hermia. Hermia loves Lysander, but she's being told that she should marry Demetrius. Okay, like we said in lesson 5, Aegeus can be considered a severe father. Like you probably remember me saying, I think it was pretty harsh that he said that she couldn't marry the person she loved and she had to marry Demetrius. So we can say that he's a very severe character. He's a severe father. Okay, moving on. Well, this is what we know about the characters so far. So Theseus, we know, is the ruler of ancient Athens. He has to make sure people don't break the law. And over there on the right, we've got Hippolyta. Now, Hippolyta is a warrior queen who's going to marry Theseus in just 4 days' time. So what can we remember about these characters then? We did just have a very brief discussion, but take a look at the pictures in front of you. There's Demetrius, Aegeus, Hermia and Lysander. What I'd like you to do is write down at least one thing that you can remember about each of those characters. So pause the slideshow or video right here and then come back and have a look at the responses that I have. So Demetrius wants to marry Hermia, and Aegeus also wants him to marry Hermia. Aegeus wants Hermia to marry Demetrius or be killed. Hermia wants to marry Lysander, and Lysander, he is the man Hermia wants to marry, and he wants to marry her too. So not only does Demetrius want to marry Hermia, so does Lysander. She's a popular lady. So here we have pages 2 and 3 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and we're going to take a look at the different elements of the script right now. So moving on to the next slide. The script is on the right hand side of the page, as you can see just here. You will notice when you're reading scripts that stage directions are written in italics. They say what should be happening in the scene and sometimes where the scene is set. So usually you'll find those in typical play scripts. Obviously one is indicated just there with the green box around it like so. And this will tell you what is happening on stage, where the characters should move and potentially how they should be acting or feeling towards each other. The names in bold tell you which character is speaking. Now in some play scripts, these names are on the left-hand side with a little colon next to them, and that indicates who's going to speak. And in some texts, it just says the names that are in bold are the characters that are going to speak instead. The line numbers help you find your place quickly. You'll find this typically in Shakespearean scripts. You'll also find it in poetry as well, that there'll be numbers down the side indicating which lines. So for example, if I said to you, can you go to Act 1, Scene 1, line 30, you'll be able to look at what page number you're on, like whether you're on the right act and the right scene, and you just look down the side to find line 30. The act and scene, like I just mentioned, that you should be looking for are usually in the top of the page. They're similar to chapters, but they're for a play. Usually plays are set in acts, so you might have Act 1, Act 2, even Act 3, and those acts are broken down into scenes. So for example, you might have been to see a musical before, like for example The Lion King, and The Lion King might be in 2 different acts, which are separated by an interval in the middle. So The glossary down the left-hand side of the page tells you what certain words and phrases mean, and you can use the line numbers to guide you. This isn't in every script, but the one we're looking at today does give an example of a glossary. So you might think, I don't know what that word means on line 22, and then you'll look in the glossary on the left and it will show you what line 22 might mean. Obviously, where you're at home, it's a little bit difficult to show you what the script looks like because we can't have the book right in front of you. So we're adapting the way that you can see the glossary and the lines. So take a look at the screen in front of you. The main script is highlighted in the top green box there on the right hand side. Who is speaking, like I said, is on the left hand side of the page in that little green box there. On the right hand side, on the far right, you'll see the line numbers. And back again over onto the left, you'll see the glossary at the bottom of the page defining what some of the words mean. So what we're going to do is we're going to read through lines 46 to 82 and we're going to find out how each of the characters reacts to what Aegeus has said. So there are your list of characters on the screen in front of you. We're going to have appearances from Theseus, Hippolyta, Demetrius, Aegeus, Hermia and Lysander. Now, we will move on to the next slide where we will start to read the script. Okay, so Year 7, we're going to go through and read some more of Act 1, Scene 1. I am joined by my glamorous assistants from Year 9 and 10. We have Saf, Tom, Max and Kieran, who will all be reading along with me. I will be reading the part of Theseus, Saf will be Hermia, we will have Tom as Aegeus, Max as Lysander, and Kieran as Demetrius. So we are going to start from the top of the page. You can follow along on the PowerPoint presentation, or there will also be an attachment in a Word document with a modern translation on Show My Homework, which you can always take a look at as well. Okay. What say you, Hermia? Be advised, fair maid, to you your father should be as a god, one who is composed your beauties, yea, and one to whom you are but as a form, and was by him imprinted, and within his power to leave the figure or disfigure it. Demetrius is a worthy gentleman.
So is Lysander.
In himself he is, but in this kind, wanting your father's voice, the other must be held the worthier.
I would, my father looked but with my eyes.
Rather your eyes must with his judgment look.
I do entreat your grace to pardon me. I know not by what power I am made bold, nor how it may concern my modesty, in which such a presence here to plead my thoughts, but I beseech your grace that I may know the worst that may befall me in this case, if I refuse to wed Demetrius.
Either to die the death, or to abjure for ever the society of men. Therefore, fair Hermia, question your desires, know of your youth, examine well your blood, whether if you yield not to your father's choice you can endure the livery of a nun. For I to be in shady cloister mewed, to live in barren sister all your life, chanting faint hymns to the cold fruitless moon. Thrice blessed that they master so their blood to undergo such maiden pilgrimage. But earthlier happy is the rose distilled than that which, withering on virgin thorn, grows, lives, and dies in single blessedness.
So will I grow, so live, so die, my lord. I will yield but my virgin patient up unto his lordship, whose unwished you God, my soul consents not to give sovereign.
Lovely. Thank you very much to Saf as well, who helped me read in for Hermia there. So, like I said, if you struggle to understand what was going on there, essentially what Theseus is saying is that Hermia should fall in love with Demetrius as opposed to Lysander. He's basically saying to her that she needs to choose Lysander to go, she needs to choose Demetrius to go along with what her father has said. Now we're going to move on very shortly onto the next script, so make sure you're paying close attention. And like I said, if you're struggling with reading along, then there's a paper copy with translations that will be on Show My Homework. What I'd like you to do now is just take a look at the following questions for me. So, on your screen, you should have 4 questions coming up, and they all indicate which lines you should look at for the responses. For example, the first question, how does Theseus think Hermia should view her father? You should look to line 47 to guide you in order to respond to that question and know what to say. Same with question 2, for example, Theseus tries to convince Hermia that Demetrius is a good man. What does Hermia say? You can take a direct quote from line 53 to answer that question. So what I'd like you to do is pause the video right here, or pause the PowerPoint presentation if you're doing this on PowerPoint, and I would like you to just answer those questions and then come back to the following slide when you've done that. Here are the responses that you should have had. So Hermia should view her father as a god, as quoted in the text. Theseus tries to convince Hermia that Demetrius is a good man. What does Hermia say? Well, when Theseus tries to convince Hermia that Demetrius is a good man, she says, so is Lysander. So she's therefore claiming that he is also a good man. How does Hermia want Aegeus to see the situation? Well, she wants him to be able to see the situation through her eyes. Imagine that. If you really loved someone, but your dad wanted you to love someone else, all you'd want them to do is just see it through your eyes and see how you might be feeling. So what's Hermia prepared to do in order to avoid marrying Demetrius? Line 79, you'll find that it says Hermia says she's prepared to die in order to avoid marrying Demetrius. That's how much she loves Lysander. So make sure you've got the right answers to your questions. You can pause here and write them down. If not, you can move on with me to the next slide. So let's continue reading to find out how the other characters react to what Aegeus has said. We're going to read lines 83 to 127, and I will bring back my glamorous assistants from year 9 and 10. Look out for these characters. We are going to be seeing more appearances from Theseus, Hippolyta, Demetrius, Aegeus, Hermia and Lysander. Take time to pause, and by the next new moon, the sealing day betwixt my love and me, for everlasting bond of fellowship, upon the day either prepare to die for disobedience of your father's will, or else to wed Demetrius, as he would, or on Diana's altar to protest for austerity and single life.
Sweet Hermia, and I, Lysander, yield the crazed title to my certain right.
You have her father's love, Demetrius. Let me have Hermia's. Do you marry him?
Scornful Lysander, true, he hath my love, and what is mine, my love shall render him. And she is mine, and all my right of her I do estate unto Demetrius.
I am, my lord, as well derived as he, as well possessed. My love is more than his. My fortune every way is fairly ranked, if not met with vantage as Demetrius, and which is more than all these boasts can be. I am beloved of beauteous Hermia. Why should not that I then prosecute my right? Demetrius, I'll avouch it to his head. Mad love to Nidar's daughter, Helena, and won her soul, and she, sweet lady, dotes devoutly, dotes in adultery upon his spotted and inconstant man.
I must confess that I have heard so much, and with Demetrius thought to have spoke thereof, but being overfull of self-affairs, my mind did lose it. But Demetrius, come, and come, Aegeus, you shall go with me. I have some private schooling for you both. For you, fair Hermia, look you arm yourself to fit your fancies to your father's will, or else the law of Athens yields you up, which by no means we may extenuate, to death or to a vow of single life. Come, my Hippolyta, what cheer, my love? Demetrius and Aegeus, go along. I must employ you in some business against our nuptial, and confer with you of something nearly that concerns yourselves.
With duty and desire we follow you.
What I'd like you to do now is answer these questions for me. How does Demetrius feel about his relationship with Hermia? You'll find some help with this on line 92. And also answer question 2. What 3 main reasons does Lysander give for why he should marry Hermia rather than Demetrius? Now that's a bit of a tricky one, but you can find some help between lines 99 and 110. Now, take a few minutes, pause the video, respond to those questions for me, and then see if we have similar responses on the next slide. So, how does Demetrius feel about his relationship with Hermia? Demetrius thinks he has a right to marry Hermia because her father wants him to, so he feels like it is his position to marry her. What three main reasons does Lysander give for why he should marry Hermia rather than Demetrius? Well, Lysander gives three reasons, saying that he is just as good as Demetrius, that Hermia loves him, and that Demetrius used to chase after a different girl called Helena, who still loves him. See, the plot thickens, guys. It's getting very intense in this relationship we've got going on between Demetrius, Hermia and Lysander. Let's just take a quick review of what's happened so far in the play. So each character has a different opinion of the events of the scene. What I'd like you to do is summarise what each character is thinking in this scene. Take a few minutes to write down your responses on your page. You can either do some thought bubbles like we've got here, or you can write bullet point notes. I don't really mind, however you'd prefer to do it. And just write what you think each character is thinking. Then on the next slide, we will go through some thoughts together and hopefully you'll have something similar to me. Well, each character has a different opinion of the events of the scene. So, my responses I've got, Demetrius, I think he's thinking that Hermia should do as her father says and just marry me. Whilst Lysander is thinking he's just as good as Demetrius and Hermia loves him. Aegeus is thinking, well, Hermia's my daughter, so she should do as I say. And Hermia's over here thinking, well, I wish my father could see with my eyes and let me marry Lysander. So it's all a very dramatic situation here, guys. Aegeus wants Hermia to marry Demetrius, whilst Hermia, all she wants to do is marry Lysander. Let's move on to the next slide. Another character we've got in the scene is Theseus, and I think Theseus might be thinking that he has to uphold the law of Athens, and Hermia must do as her father says, or face the consequences. That would be kind of like, imagine if Boris Johnson told you that you had to marry a certain person because you've got to uphold the law of Great Britain. It'd be pretty crazy, wouldn't it? Your final task for this lesson is to write your answers to these questions. How is Hermia vulnerable in this scene? Do you think it would be fair to call Aegeus malicious? Why or why not? You might need to look up the definitions of those words if you're not quite sure on what they mean, but take a look and see, just have a little think about whether or not you think Hermia is vulnerable or whether Aegeus is malicious. And then, as your extension, what I'd like you to do is answer this question for me. Do you think Hermia can be considered a victim of anything? And if so, why? Or if not, why not? So pause the video here and I would like you to answer those questions for me before going on to the next slide. Here are my responses to the questions on the previous slide. So I think Hermia is vulnerable because she could be killed if she doesn't do what her father says. She's in a very difficult situation, isn't she, really? It is genuinely a matter of life or death. Number two, I think it might be fair to call Aegeus malicious because Lysander is just as appropriate a husband for Hermia as Demetrius is. He doesn't have a good reason for opposing the marriage to Lysander. However, it might be fairer to call him stubborn, obviously, as opposed to malicious. He's mainly worried about being disobeyed rather than necessarily wanting to hurt Hermia. So it might be a case of the fact that he just wants to get his own way, and that is why he wants her to marry Demetrius rather than Lysander. Taking a look at the extension, my response would be that Hermia could be considered a victim of Athens' severe laws, because if it weren't for the law, Aegeus might not be able to stop her marrying Lysander. Okay, now you're ready to complete the quiz, which you should be able to find on Show My Homework. Once you've done that, you've completed the lesson for the day, so well done for finishing lesson 6. You can move straight on to lesson 7 if you would like to, or if you don't have the time and would like to come to it in your next lesson, then by all means move on in the next time you have a timetabled English lesson. Hi Year 7, welcome to lesson 7 of your Heritage Scheme of Work this half term. If you have joined us again, make sure that you go and grab yourselves a piece of paper and a pen, get ready to write your date and title, and if you've managed to carry on from lesson 6, well done, just make sure that you're writing the new title of this lesson. There is your title at the top of the slide, Theseus' Athens, and make sure you write down the date as well. And what I'd like you to do is crack on with the do now starter for me, please, which is to fill in the blanks of these statements you can see in front of you. There's also an extension at the bottom, so I'd like you to answer that in a full sentence for me, please. What would you do if you were Hermia and Lysander? Now make sure that you're getting all of the responses written down before you move on to the next slide. And please be sure to take a photo of any work that you've done to submit on Show My Homework, or at the very least start compiling all of your handwritten notes ready to show us when you come back to school. So I suggest you pause the slide now to take a look at the statements, and we will come back on the next slide to take a look at some answers. So here are the responses that you should have got Year 7. Hermia is in love with Lysander. Lysander is in love with Hermia. Theseus is engaged to Hippolyta. Hermia does not want to marry Demetrius. Aegeus is the father of Hermia, and Demetrius thinks that he should marry Hermia. Let's move on to the next slide. So last lesson, we looked at how various characters responded to Aegeus' complaint. Remember, Demetrius thought that Hermia should do as her father says and marry him. Lysander thinks that he's just as good as Demetrius, and Hermia loves him. Aegeus thinks that Hermia is his daughter, and so she should do as he says. And Hermia says she wishes her father could see with her eyes and let her marry Lysander. So today we're going to look at Theseus' response in more detail. You'll notice from lesson 6 that we didn't go into this in a huge amount of detail. We just kind of touched on his thoughts just before we moved on to the final few tasks. But Theseus wanted to uphold the law of Athens and thought that Hermia must do as her father says or face the consequences. So we're going to take a look at what Theseus says to Hermia. Now, think about this question for me. How does Theseus think Hermia should treat her father? Now, there's a quotation on the screen in front of you. I'm going to try and go through this as slowly as possible so you can kind of keep track of the annotations as I talk you through. So we're going to in theory, we're going to annotate the quotation together. Obviously, I will be doing it for you and kind of taking you through it step by step. So look at the screen in front of you. This is the quotation. Theseus says, "To you your father should be as a god, one that composed your beauties, yea, and one to whom you are but as a form in wax, by him imprinted, and within his power to leave the figure or disfigure it." Now it's a bit of a tricky quotation to get your head round, so let's break it down. So in the first line he says Hermia should obey her father and even worship him, because he says, "To you your father should be as a god." So he's essentially saying you should look to your father above everybody else. Let's go on to the next line. So here we've skipped a little bit. We've skipped on to the third line of this quotation here, and it says, "To whom you are but as a form in wax." By this, he means that Hermia is like the figure Aegeus is made out of wax, and she is just a copy of him. Okay? Obviously, she is not literally a form of wax. This is kind of a metaphorical comparison here, but we need to sort of think about how she is created in his image. She is his child, and Theseus is implying here that he has control of what Hermia does and what she says and how she acts. So he's kind of comparing Hermia to a model made by her father. I hope that makes sense so far. Now, taking a look at the last line, to leave the figure or disfigure it. So Aegeus has the power to change or destroy Hermia if he wants to. So basically what they're saying here is that he has the power to destroy her or change her if he wants to. I know this is a bit of a tricky quotation to get your head round, but when you break it down into little bits, it's a lot easier to understand. Take a look at the slide in front of you. Based on what Theseus has said, which words describe life in ancient Athens? What I'd like you to do is be prepared to explain your choices. Obviously, I can't hear back from you right now, so what I would like you to do is choose some words and keep in mind what you would do to explain why you have chosen that word. You might want to make some notes potentially if you'd like to, if it helps you to sort of break it down a little bit better. For example, I might say that life in ancient Athens was severe. And I think it's severe because it's a very harsh rule to make people marry other people that they don't want to. And that would be kind of my thought process behind picking the word severe. So what I want you to do is pick a couple of words, maybe write them down, and just to kind of get your head around how you think life in ancient Athens might have been. I'd like you to do that before moving on to the next slide. So here are 4 different words that I have picked. I've picked traditional, severe, ordered, and brutal. Have a moment to just think about why I might have chosen those words. So last term you should have looked at how to start an analytical paragraph with correct opening statements. An analytical paragraph is when you are analysing. Note the start of the word analytical looks a bit like the word analysing, is when you are analysing either a theme, character or quotation to find out what it's trying to present and what the author's intentions might be, or the writer's intentions. So an opening statement does 3 important things. It answers the question, it says something accurate, and it also should focus on one thing in particular. Let's take a look at an example below. So here's a question. What kind of father is Aegeus in A Midsummer Night's Dream? So in response to that, a correct opening statement would do this. It would say, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, so it would correctly outline what we're analysing or where we are taking our analysis from. So in A Midsummer Night's Dream, Aegeus is a severe father. So it immediately answers the question because it says that this person thinks Aegeus is a severe father. It definitely says something accurate because we know that Aegeus is a severe father from what we've read. And it also focuses on one thing, okay? It outlines one statement that is correct. Now what I'd like you to do is write down at least 2 opening statements to answer the question, how does Shakespeare present ancient Athens in the first scene of the play? Now you should have written down some of your words to describe ancient Athens or what you think life in ancient Athens might have been like. So you might want to consider opening your statement with one of those key words that you noted down just now. I would like you to take a few moments, pause the PowerPoint or the video that you're watching right now, take a few moments to write down your 2 opening statements and then come back and I will discuss with you some examples. Here are some examples of some opening statements. In the first scene of the play, Shakespeare presents Athens as severe. So it clearly says where it is and how it's presented. In the first scene of the play, Shakespeare presents Athens as brutal. In the first scene of the play, Shakespeare presents Athens as tough. And in the first scene of the play, Shakespeare presents Athens as ordered. So all of these statements clearly outline where the information is coming from and what we think about it. Now what I'd like you to do is write an analytical paragraph on this question. How does Shakespeare present ancient Athens in the first scene of the play? So we're writing this in a C's paragraph style. You should be used to this as we should have started doing this with you in the lead up to now in your classes when you're in school. So what we do in order to form a C's paragraph is we begin the paragraph with an opening statement. So you can use one of the ones that you came up with just now. Then you use one of the quotations below as your evidence. For example, we know this when Theseus says to Hermia, "To you your father should be as a god, you are but as a form of wax by him imprinted, and within his power to leave the figure or disfigure it." So if your quotation is separated by lines, you can always use the / mark just as it's shown on the slideshow in order to show where there's a break in the line. The I part of the C's paragraph is to next infer what Theseus meant by this. So that's what we think he might have meant. That's what we can infer from the information that we've got. So it might not be directly told to you, but you know this and you can infer it, you can think about it as a result of what you have read. Then the Z part of the C's paragraphs is to zoom in on one word that really stands out, like God or disfigure. Okay, you might want to zoom in on a key word. And then the last part of a C's paragraph is to comment on the effect this would have on the audience. Now, I'd really like you to try and give this a go by yourselves. Now, if you're really struggling, you can move on to the next slide to see an example of this, but I'd really like you to try and give it a go yourself. Here's an example from one student in their answer to the question, how does Shakespeare present ancient Athens in the first scene of the play? So what I'd like you to take a look at for me while we read along is to just keep an eye out for the different elements of the C's paragraph. In the first scene of the play, Shakespeare presents Athens as brutal. This can be seen when Theseus says that Aegeus has the power to leave the figure or disfigure it. As Hermia is the figure, Theseus is warning her that her father has the power to abandon her or to harm her. This suggests that Athens is a society that has strict laws with harsh consequences. By saying that Hermia is like a wax figure, Theseus compares her to a thing that can be easily changed and controlled by her father. Theseus explains that Aegeus has the power to disfigure Hermia. This implies that in ancient Athens, fathers could hurt their daughters if they did not obey their orders. Therefore, the audience can see that Athens is a severe place. Remember what I asked you to do just now. I'd like you to try and think about how this paragraph could be broken down into the different elements of the C's paragraph before moving on. Now, looking at that paragraph, I'd like you to consider, would you make any additions or changes to your answer based on the student's response? Now, once you've finished writing your response, I would like you to check your writing. So, check 1. Is your quotation written in a sentence that makes sense? Check 2. Make sure you've put capitals in the front of all names, including the name of the city. So obviously Athens should begin with a capital A. Check 3. Have you spelled Athens, Theseus, Aegeus, Hermia, Lysander and Demetrius correctly? And check 4. Have you used accurate punctuation in all of your sentences? Give yourselves a tick where you have done all of the mastery checks for me, and then we can move on. So, our last part of the lesson today, I would like you to consider which opening statements are correct. So, we've got A. Ancient Athens was a chaotic place where people were killed for no reason. B. Ancient Athens was a place where daughters had to obey their fathers. C. Ancient Athens was a corrupt place where people could break the rules to get what they want. D. Ancient Athens was a place where breaking the rules did not have severe consequences. And E. Ancient Athens was a place where the ruler was prepared to be severe to keep order. Now I'd like you to take a few moments to take a look over those statements again, and then pause the PowerPoint or video, write down your responses, and then move on to the next slide. You should have these as your correct statements. So B was correct. Ancient Athens was a place where daughters had to obey their fathers. And E was also correct. Ancient Athens was a place where the ruler was prepared to be severe to keep order. So if you've got those right, give yourselves a couple of ticks. So you've made it to the end of lesson 7 on the heritage scheme of work so far. Well done for completing all of your work this week. Make sure that if you've written everything on lined paper that you take photos and submit it to your teachers on Show My Homework, unless they have directed you to hang on to your paper copies until you come back to school. If you would prefer, you can also submit any responses on Show My Homework in Word documents, and just make sure that your teacher is aware that you're keeping on track. Even if you're keeping everything on paper, just send them a little note on Show My Homework just to let them know that you are keeping on track with the work. So we look forward to seeing your responses, and I'll catch you all soon.